Is Ruth there? Okay.
Yes, I am.
All right. So what are you looking for?
Yeah. We think she'll be sharing. So reading from the article, at least she spoke about the founders agreement, spoke about um, copyrights and around those lines. So just better understanding, clearer, um, yes, clearer understanding on what they are and how we can impute it into our own startup. Thank you.
All right. That's fantastic, Ruth. I trust that you get answers to the questions on your mind. Okay, there's Samuel here. Sam, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to? Hi. So what are you looking forward to learning in this very short conversation?
Yeah, so I see that we are looking at reviewing agreements. It's what the topic, I mean, the discussion is going to be all about. And as founders and CEOs of different businesses, we are going to be reviewing a lot of agreements. So I'm looking out to what are the key things or statements or portions of the agreements we need to pay attention to and how that can affect our businesses.
Okay, that's great. I'm sure that Samuel always asks questions at the end of, of the day, so I'm sure that she would do justice to some of the questions on your mind. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Sorry about the delay.
No problem, Beverly. So let me hand over to Mr. Dami so that he can do the introduction and you have the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dami, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's a very, very big pleasure and honor to have with us this evening, Beverly from the prestigious Olisa Agbakuba Legals. I have the honors of introducing our speaker today. She is interestingly, at the base is a lawyer, but interestingly, not just a lawyer generalist, but she especially focuses on sports and on startups. She is a career mom of 3, does a lot of public speaking, and then she heads a team of specialists at OAL, that's Olisa Agbakuba Legal. She's the founder of Lagos Tigers Football Club. I've not gotten the opportunity to ask her if she plays soccer herself. She talks about sports business, intellectual property, regulatory and compliance, personal development. I've had the pleasure of having lengthy conversations with her, especially around matters that help startups then grow and to do wonderful work. And so I look forward to us having a wonderful time today and listening to her. I crave our indulgence to, as much as it depends on us, take note of our questions as she speaks, so that once we have the opportunity, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to have our full attention because she's everywhere. So now that we have our attention, ask those tough questions. This is an opportunity to get, and I want to whisper this so that every other person on this call can hear, but she won't hear. So I assume she's not hearing now. This is an opportunity to get to open public legal advice. Although this session is capped, so it's get ready.
Dami, it sounds like your network is fluctuating a bit. Or is it me? Whose network is bad? Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. I guess Dami's okay. It looks like he's on mute, so I'll just proceed if that's okay. Awesome, Micah. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today, esteemed members of the 8th year startup community. I'm really pleased to be here. And thank you so much again for the invitation to address you all on contracts. My name is Beverly, and I head the Sports, Entertainment, and Technology practice at Lisa Abakoba Legal. And yes, sorry. Okay. And yes, I do quite a few different things aside from being a lawyer. But I do believe that the various things I do kind of all come together in a nice way. Hi, Dami. Maybe you need to mute. Maybe Dami needs to mute himself. So all the various things I do in the startup. I'm sorry. Okay. So all the various things I do, from a lot of public speaking, I also do quite a bit of facilitating, I do quite a bit of teaching, and like you rightly said, I'm pretty involved in the sports industry as well, in various capacities, policy making, as a club owner. But today, we're going to focus on contracts and startups, and why startups need to be, at least have a good grounding, a good foundation in contracts. So I kind of call it the contracts 101, what you need to know. Of course, I'm not advocating for DIY. I still firmly believe that startup industry and the legal industry need to work together. So I'm not saying once the objective of this webinar is you can now become a master of contracts. No, because I certainly didn't go to university for 7 years for nothing. But definitely today, the objective is for you to have a better understanding, perhaps, of what you should expect from a contract, and also perhaps a better understanding of what your obligations are, just knowing that contracts create formal, permanent obligations. Well, permanent as far as the duration, not permanent like the rest of your life. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off on the various types of contracts potentially encounter as a startup. Don't forget, startup space is vast. It is vast. I know, I'm assuming majority of you here are tech, have tech, that you leverage tech in your businesses in some way. But the thing is, many of you might be involved in so many different areas, from edutech, to fintech, to health tech, to agri-tech, to logitech. The list goes on. So I can't give you a one size fits all, but I can definitely just share some things that I think will help. What I want to do is I want to talk for about 20 minutes so we can have a very interactive session. I think it would be more beneficial if people ask questions that hopefully can help other people. So let's start off with the kinds of contracts you can expect to encounter, or at least the basic few you should be very familiar with. And then we can talk about certain clauses that you should also be familiar with. And then we can then talk about common legal mistakes that startup founders make. So let me start. So I've already said that contracts they create long-lasting formal relationships. And typically, when you begin to work on your startup, In fact, before anything is set up, before you even have your prototype, before you have your plans laid out, you have an idea, you have a burning idea in your head, and you need to share it with someone. So at this point, you could be shopping around for the co-founder, you could be looking for financing, you could be looking for, even just share this with that potentially help your business. So one typical agreement that most startup founders here will be aware of, I hope, is an NDA. An NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. And the benefits of an NDA, as the name goes, non-disclosure, is to non-disclosure and confidentiality agreement is essentially to protect the information, the trade secrets, the sensitive, confidential information that you be exchanging with another party. And the reason why, the reason is pretty obvious, because you want to make sure that that person doesn't go away and replicate or duplicate what you discuss. Now, I need to make something clear. Ideas, concepts are usually not protected. Okay, so I just want to clarify, if you have an idea for a business that does, I don't know, maybe a health tech business, and you share the concept, honestly speaking, that's why we have to be very careful. NDAs are relevant, but the truth is, just talking about it is still an idea form. It's still very much at the early stages. So please, I would always recommend putting in writing your plans, your prototypes, your plans, put them in writing, because trust me, an NDA is kind of more effective if you have even a concept note. Trust me, because without that, it makes it more difficult to enforce or to litigate or kick off a dispute resolution, because ideas are not protected, okay? It's like an idea cannot be trademarked. So please bear that in mind. So at the beginning stage, when you're having conversations, you might want to show someone your prototype, a manuscript. Maybe somebody here amongst you might be in the entertainment business and they have a fantastic idea for either an entertainment an entertainment tech company, or you know, an AI business in music. It's always good to have, to some degree, your plans in writing, because when you then share those plans and they sign the NDA, it becomes a lot more, it becomes much easier to show proof that these people saw the plans and went ahead to replicate. So you kind of have a stronger footing. So just something to bear in mind. So you're used to NDAs. I'm sure many of you here are familiar with NDAs. So from the early stages, you begin to get your business registered. You begin to look for a co-founder. At the point of finding a co-founder who could have potentially signed an NDA, you now feel comfortable that this person has the qualities, has what it takes to help you run this business. So potentially, you should be looking to sign a founder's agreement, okay? And I know, and to be very honest with you, a lot of the startups I've met, a lot of the startups and the entrepreneurs I've encountered, they don't have that. It tends to come a bit after. People just quickly rush out, they incorporate, they have their shareholders and directors all set out, but they don't get the founders' agreement together. And I tell you why that is not a good thing. It's not a good thing because you know what it's like when you're running a startup. Things move very quickly. Things become very dynamic. The goalposts keep shifting. You really want a lot of clarity when you're running a business with multiple partners to avoid anyone kind of overstepping boundaries. So if you're looking for a CTO, you're looking for a COO, you're looking for even a CRO, in the early days, a lot of these roles tend to blur into one another. So potentially you could have two co-founders in the early days, and everybody is double hatting. One person is the CEO, CRO, the compliance person, the other person is CFO, CEO. And then at some point, lines begin to blur. And when lines blur, there's more room for misunderstanding. So I would say, have a balanced approach. You don't need to necessarily jump headfirst into an agreement. I'm not advocating that either, but I do believe that co-founders must sit down and say, okay, who is doing what? And also the role of the CEO, how long will that role be held for? If there's a chairman role, the role of the chairman and the CEO could potentially rotate, say every 3 years, for instance. So all these issues, challenges, detail needs to be added to a co-founders agreement. Co-founders agreement some people interchange it with the shareholders agreement. So your shareholders are the people who are putting in their sweat equity, they're putting in cash equity, they're bringing in technical equity, brand, you name it, their networks, whatever form of equity they're bringing, it's coming to the table, and that is measured according, and that equity is divided amongst the co-founders. So a shareholders agreement also works similar to a co-founder, but the thing about shareholders is it's more concerned with the legalistic structure and nature of your business. So the co-founders agreement speaks more to the operational side of the business, like whose role, who's going to be handling what, shares and divesting will go in the shareholders agreement. So yeah, so all the operational things will be in the co-founders agreement. Although there might be some overlap. So for instance, if there's an exit of co-founders, what happens? How do you handle an exit? And it happens, like the co-founder 3 years down the line would say, you know what? I'm out, peace out. I need to move to Australia and set up a new life. I've given it a good shot, I'm done. It's fine, it happens, it's normal. So there needs to be some kind of explanation as to what are the steps that need to be taken and a co-founder wishes to leave. Similarly, in the shareholders agreement, that overlap of how to deal with exits also is treated in the shareholders agreement. So, naturally, you're going to have clauses that cover the shareholding. What's the shareholding going to do? Who holds what? What's the percentage of that shareholding? Then vesting, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the term vesting, where we're looking at how are those shares going to be allocated? Are we going to give everybody their shares immediately? Like, boom, everybody gets their shares. 3 of us, we're getting, 4 of us, we're all getting our equal share out of 100% of the pie. But a lot of founders I'm meeting these days are a lot more wary because life happens. So what people do these days is they do something called vesting, where the shares are vested gradually, like a cliff. It's gradual. You accumulate more as time goes by, and then you have the cliff, which is after a 5-year period, you're entitled to everything. Okay, so the shareholders agreement is very, very important. It deals with a lot of legalities. It deals with how you hold your board meetings. It deals with, it deals with board meetings, the frequency, because you all know, even though startups are private, I always advocate for best practice. I believe that when you run a business, you want to deploy best practices from the beginning as much as possible, because trust me, the way you run your business is very telling of potentially how successful you can be. You don't want a business that has leakage here and there, a business that doesn't document, and just it gets so messy, you know. And moreover, so many people are looking for fundraising. Although I have a different view of fundraising, I really am a strong believer in organic, a mix of organic and fundraising. But because we're so crazy about fundraising, if you want to fundraise in the next 4 or 5 years, these are the sort of things you need to pay attention to. So your shareholders agreement, if you've never looked at it before, I suggest you open it and read it for those people who actually have shareholding agreements. So other important things in shareholding agreements, how do you share the intellectual property? I mean, IP is such a major asset, and I'm super happy that many more startup hubs, accelerators, such as 8Gear and many others are really driving the importance of intellectual property. So a major clause you want to look out for in your agreement is intellectual property. Who does it belong to? Okay, so can you imagine if you're a co-founder A, you've got co-founder B, C, and maybe co-founder A comes up with the idea, comes up with the brand, the look, the feel, but maybe co-founder B is the brains behind the engineering of how the startup is going to run. So you ask yourself, how do we share the IP? So some startups take the approach of everybody just shares everything equally, but some are clever enough to say, you know what? Let's limit our shareholding to just the assets, the business itself. Let's remove the brand of the business. Let's take it out of the equation. So those sort of clauses you need to pay attention to. If you've never thought about this, then it's something you need to think about, because you could think about it this way: in the event of some kind of acquisition, or some people might say, you know what, you can acquire the assets, the tangible assets, but leave my brand alone. That's mine. If you want my brand, you need to license my brand. So I want you all to really think about this deeply, okay? Your brand is an asset just as much as all the computers in your office, the cars, all that. So you need to start thinking about how the control of your brand, the long-term control, licensing. You never really want to give your brand outright to another company, to another individual. So clauses around IP are very important to consider. And when you're working with lawyers, that's something that they obviously will. So we've talked so far about shareholding. We've talked about IP. Another thing that you encounter aside from the shareholders agreement is employment contracts. Again, this is it goes without saying, you're going to encounter so many different types of workers: casual staff, permanent, full-time, contractors, so many. So you really need to be aware of the labor laws. Maybe not in detail, but at least please be aware of them, because I tell you right now, everybody's eyes have opened. People are more aware of their rights today in 2023 than they were 10 years ago. So don't be shocked if, worst case scenario, an occupational hazard happens in the office. If you're running like a physical office, I know many people have virtual offices. But imagine having a physical office, something happens in the office, occupational hazard, one of the employees slips, falls, breaks their back. They sue you and say, why was there a wet floor in the office? I'm suing you for XXX. There's no insurance. There's nothing in the contracts about how you look after employees. So they're going to default to the law and what the labor law says. So please, you have to really take cognizance of your obligations as an employer vis-a-vis your employees. know how to treat every employee. You need to be aware of the taxes to an extent. Are you paying your PAYE? Right now, tax offices, trust me, they're all coming after people. They're coming after the founders as well, telling founders to declare their annual returns. I'm sure you must have seen the personal assessments. So there's so much you need to be aware of as a founder, and you can't do it alone. The truth is, the objective of this session is not for you to go out there and do things on your own. It's for you to be aware, oh, this obligation I didn't know, and work with, startup lawyer that you feel comfortable with. So yeah, so employment contracts, please, you need to get these right, because if you don't get them right, people start claiming all sorts of things, rightly or wrongly. Also, please be aware that when it comes to employment disputes, the courts, there's a specific court for employment disputes, and it's called the Industrial Court, the National Industrial Court of Nigeria. So all your employment contracts should contain a clause on disputes and what happens if your internal dispute resolution mechanism fails. Where does it end up? So that's something else for you to think about. Okay, other types of contracts. You're going to be working with potentially third parties, right? For those of you on the call that are in the tech space, you're going to need software developers, graphic designers, content writers. Right now, I tell you, it's like it's open season for people in the creative space. So many jobs have been created. Who would have thought 10 years ago that you could engage people full time just to write content? Crazy, right? But guess what? That's where we are. So please, when you're creating all these vendor-based agreements, please be very mindful of something. People can't subcontract other people. So you really want to make sure that the contracts are very clear and it states this cannot be assigned to a third party. Because I tell you the truth, people are running multiple gigs, multiple, like the gig economy is live and kicking, okay? So you really want to make sure that the people you engage aren't using you to make money. Does that make sense? So it's a bit like when you rent out a property, you want to make sure that the person you rent to isn't doing Airbnb with your property, right? So you need to make sure that people are not sub-gigging out the gigs to other people. So please, contracts for service, they're called contracts for service. I don't know if, okay, it's being recorded, so I guess people can watch this later if you're taking notes. So contracts for service are typically the kind of contracts you use when dealing with your vendors, your software developers, etc. And please, another thing to be mindful of, a contract for service is also known as a work for hire, okay? What does that mean, a work for hire? It simply means that anyone you engage to do a piece of work, whether that is create a website, whether that is do some coding, whether that is content creation, etc. The work they do belongs to the business. You, the founder, the co-founders, the business, it belongs to you, not to the vendor. Because there have been tussles at times over who owns what. And when founders aren't even clear themselves about their rights, can see how easily even founders can be exploited by contractors. So please, contracts must be very, very clear. This is a work for hire, and the outcome of the work belong to the company. Okay, so that would be the default. If it's a situation where you're sharing the IP or you're sharing the work, then it needs to also be okay, so those are just some of the contracts I think I now want to get into, because I'm really conscious of time and I want to make sure that people have enough time to ask a question. So I really want to get into common legal mistakes. And it's interesting because I actually have an article on this, which I hope Gear will share with you. So some common legal mistakes tend to start around the human side of the business. I always say the biggest risks when doing business lie more on the human side before you even get to the business side. So first common mistake could be the wrong co-founder. What do? You picked the wrong co-founder. Maybe the co-founder promised heaven and earth. They promised they were going to bring all these contacts, they were going to help with this, and that didn't transpire. Or you pick the co-founder who goes away and sets up an identical business. So so those kind of situations tend to really affect the business at the outset. One, because a dispute has effectively started. Resources are being drained trying to win back control of the business, or trying to prevent a potential competitor from going out to stop that business. And of course, the only way you can do that, perhaps from a trademark perspective, would be to engage a lawyer to send out a cease and desist, where you have a co-founder, two co-founders, and there's a disagreement as to who owns the brand, and one storms off, replicates something identical, similar name, and they have a similar name on Instagram, they have a similar name, a similar website. What do you do? So in situations like that, you need to obviously engage your lawyer to send out the cease and desist. You need to engage the internet service platform providers to say there's been an infringement of my copyright, of my domain name. So all that energy and resources just goes down the drain. And unfortunately, sometimes the business can't bear the strain and eventually folds up. So that is one good example of, a common legal mistake. Another common legal mistake is, I always call it the cut and paste. The cut and paste, where founders, and I'm not going to ask anybody on this call if you've ever done it, but where founders will simply go to a website and say, you know what, I just need an employment contract. No big deal, it's easy. Fine, I'll just do a search for employment contract, cut and paste it, change, tweak here and there, and send it off. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that, one for one, I hope you're aware, there's different jurisdictions, and different jurisdictions have different legal frameworks. So the employment laws in Nigeria might be different to Ghana, notwithstanding that we're Commonwealth countries, but quite different. But one thing I see a lot is a contract that's for the UK and the alternative dispute resolution clause, and I'll explain what that is. Basically, I, as a startup lawyer, I'm a major advocate for resolving disputes outside the courtroom, because the truth of the matter is you don't want to be anywhere near courts when you have a dispute. For starters, just how long you need to wait for the lawyer to enter appearance, how long you need to wait when there are adjournments, and then there's vacation periods. It can be messy. And guess what? You have a business to run. So putting yourself at the mercy of the Nigerian courts might not be a particularly good idea. So one thing that is gaining a lot of popularity now is something called alternative dispute resolution. There's different forms. There's mediation, and I'm a mediator. There's arbitration. I'm sure many of you have heard of arbitration. That one seems to be a more popular one because it came on the scene much earlier. Mediation is a lot newer. As effective. So imagine having a contract and you don't make allowance for settling out of court. So it forces you into the courtrooms. which is a major negative point. So, dispute resolution clauses are very, very important, and founders who don't know this end up using agreements they get online that say the dispute resolution will hold in London. You don't pay attention to that clause because it's all the way down. But by the time there's a dispute, you're thinking, oh no, why on earth didn't I pay closer attention? Or you have agreements that don't have the two options. So mediation is a very popular option. It's growing in popularity. It's informal, but it still has the rubber stamp of the courts, which is fantastic. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the slightly less formal setting, but you still benefit from the formality of a rubber stamp from the courts. So mediation is something that I would highly recommend to everybody here. All agreements must contain mediation. But guess what? If you have an agreement, say with a vendor to provide a service, maybe they're supposed to provide a software service, maybe they're supposed to provide branding services, and they mess up, and you don't have the mediation clause contract, it only says arbitration. It's a disadvantage because arbitration, for starters, is more expensive. It's a lot more expensive, and it's actually quite a technical form, ADR. So there's so many things that if you're not familiar with, can get overlooked, and that omission can cost you. So ADR, settling out of court, how you manage disputes is very, very important. And a good lawyer should be able to make sure that that clause goes into the agreement. And then another thing, there's a very vital phrase that must be in that clause, and it must say each party must bear its own costs. And I'll tell you this, I was mediating this week between two healthcare providers, and interestingly, they did have a mediation clause, but unfortunately, they didn't have the each party should bear its own costs clause. So unfortunately, the person who ends up bearing the losses can't discharge it because there's no protection in the agreement to say everybody must bear their own. So these are very, very little things need to pay attention to. But again, the burden is not on you. The burden is on getting a good startup lawyer and work with. Because the truth is, if you're not a trained lawyer, you're not a trained lawyer. We can't even go through everything in one session. But these are just some of the key points that you should be aware of, at least when you're scanning through your contract. So I'll touch on one more so we can go into questions because it's almost 10 to. Another pitfall startups usually make is, I suppose, not really understanding the nuances around the regulations. Because the truth is, if you don't really know the regulations around your industry, then you're more likely to make mistakes the contract and make omissions in the contract. So it's really, really important that you understand the regulatory landscape very well. So imagine a fintech, for some strange reason, doesn't do the proper engagements with the CBN. They don't realize that they can get their micro license from the CBN. They don't realize, these are the different steps you need to take, and they end up setting up only for them to be shut down later, simply because maybe they skipped a certain step or didn't make the right consultation. So it's really important in the regulated sector. That could be health, that could be financial services, even agriculture. You need to be quite familiar with terrain to avoid, wasting of resources, precious time, and money. So again, knowing the regulatory landscape of the space you need to want to operate in is very key. Again, it's also about knowing whether there's a need for what you do. All these things have to kind of be reflected in the nature of the agreements that you have. I mean, something as simple as a clause called the force majeure. The force majeure clause is a clause that protects both sides in the event of a major act of God and something unnatural, something that happens in the blue moon. So the pandemic we experienced, for instance, that was an act of, it doesn't happen all the time. But if you didn't have the pandemic breaks it into force majeure, you could potentially have faced some major losses. But I mean, it's also important to have a good lawyer or have good negotiation skills, because the truth is circumstances change constantly. The startup landscape is constantly changing. So being on top of knowing what your external environment, knowing the risks of your external environment and making sure those risks are adequately captured. So for instance, what are your obligations going to be affected in the event of, say, a riot? If there's a riot, or if the telephone cable poles are down and it affects where you're able to deliver, say, Wi-Fi services, what obligations would you have towards your clients? Another thing, data protection, the last thing I should touch on is, if you don't handle your client's data, you could be exposing, if you mismanage your client's data, you could be exposing yourself to litigation or disputes. You need to know what the regulations are, or have your legal advisor tell you in detail what are your obligations in vis-a-vis the Nigeria data protection regulations. For instance, the NDPR. Are you aware of the Nigerian Data Protection Bureau that looks after everything concerning data protection? How are you managing data privacy? And all these should be captured at various points in either your website. So if you have virtual presence, you need to have those privacy notices on your website. So there's a whole load of things that startup founders get wrong at the beginning, simply because they're just not familiar with the terrain. Another thing, cybersecurity issues are getting worse, and you're not too small to be attacked. So you're not too big to fail, and you're not too small to be attacked. How are you protecting your business online from hackers? Can you imagine running a payment platform? Things are going well, and then the worst thing, hackers hack into your systems. They move money out. The things that hackers are doing now are unreal. How protected are you? How insulated is your business from malware threats? So the way you manage all these threats and cybersecurity and data protection clients, these need to be properly spelled out for your clients. So if you onboard clients, KYC, know your customer, you need to tell them, are you giving us permission to use your data for reach out for surveys, etc.? We can't just assume that because clients patronize our businesses, that gives us the right to, just throw their data out willy-nilly. I mean, I have seen some crazy situations where, to prove that the business is doing well and there's some customer loyalty, people actually screenshot private conversations on social media pages. It's shocking. Or on the phone, they screenshot these and they post it and say, testimonials. It's crazy. So there needs to be a balance between wanting to be a responsible SME and wanting to showcase your brilliant customer service, or that you have a very good business and things are going well. So I think those are the kind of things that you all need to take a lot of pay a lot more attention to, and the corresponding legal requirements and obligations that you hold as a business. So I think I'll stop there and take questions. If there are any questions, of course.
So no question from my end.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, no questions. Okay, so I'm guessing that it was very clear, crystal. Everybody's now perfect. Everybody knows what to do.
I do have a question. It's Mike over here.
Hi, Micah.
I just want to thank you first on this call. Sorry, my son is over here. Can you go there?
Hi.
For taking time to explain these very important points. When it comes to the various agreements you mentioned for a startup, would it be necessary to incorporate more for one of these agreements into your, would I call it a business plan, or how do you determine which is best applicable to your business niche?
Okay, good. Okay, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I mean, off the top of your heads, some things would stick out. You know, you need to engage people unless you're using ChatGPT to do everything for you. But you know you're going to need to engage employees. So it goes without saying you're going to need employee contracts. But some things, and also you know you need to potentially do some B2B. I need to work with other businesses to deliver your service. So you'll need some contract for service agreements, etc. But the truth is, or supply agreements, if you are someone that uses, say, raw materials to create an end product, right? But the thing is, not everything is going to be super clear. So I mean, there's so many resources online. You can always check out our website, www.oal.law. I see my colleague Emmanuel is on the call. You can just type in the chat. That would be very helpful. And there's so much on our website that you can read. Like, for instance, checklists. What sort of checklist should the startup have when they want to think about setting up a business? Or you could be 2 years down the line and you're thinking, you know what? 2 years down the line, things are pretty stable. I think I'm ready to develop my A game. I'm ready to do things in the right way, or I need to scale. And scaling means working with more people, and more people and more businesses is an added layer of risk. So you definitely will need so many more agreements to tie those people in. So I would always recommend speaking to a lawyer. You really can't get around it because there's things that you just won't know. I mean, if you're raising finance, you're talking to investors, typically you would need to have the corresponding financing agreements, or maybe you want a board advisor. You know, like at the moment, board advisory is really big. It's a big deal right now. Many people are looking for board advisors. Many founders, entrepreneurs are looking to set up boards, advisory boards. So you could say, you know what? I think I'm ready to take my business to the next level. I've met someone and I think they'll be a perfect fit for my board. At that point, naturally, the next step is to get a board advisor agreement. You know, is that advisory agreement in return for equity? Is it, do you know what I mean? Is it an equity agreement? So to advise my company, I give you a tiny share of my company in return. So there's different types of agreements that correspond depending on the activities of the company. So at a very small stage, maybe 4 years and under. In fact, 4 years is too long because the growth at which companies are growing is coming faster and faster in a shorter and shorter time. I mean, look at how long it took Facebook to become 100 billion, not 100 billion, but look at how long it took, sorry, that's it. Look at how long it took Facebook to have 100 million clients. It took them about 10 years. It took ChatGPT 3 months. It's crazy. So right now, the rate of growth for your businesses, the potential is there. It's better you go to people that can help you. Today is we should be letting professionals do what they do best. So if you are an entrepreneur in the fintech space, developer, what else? Data analytics, etc. Just do what you are good at doing, and then let the lawyers do what they are good at doing, which is assessing your legal risks. So to answer you, Micah, you can check out checklists online, and I'm pretty sure you'll find a checklist for the basics. But as you expand and scale, you're going to need a more bespoke approach. So that's probably what I'll say in terms of knowing your exposures and knowing what agreements you need. You're welcome. Are there any more questions? So there's a link in the chat, which will take you to all the articles we've written so many articles on so many different points, from how contracts, we've written on how to pick a co-founder, we've written on cybersecurity and the needs for business. So we're very, very startup friendly. So, take a look through and see what you can find. Are there any more questions?
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Hi, Ruth. Hi.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, thank you so much for the session.
You're welcome.
I would need clarity on the particular thing when you talked about co-founders and
yes,
they having to not stay for long. Okay, so my thought is, now I'm thinking based on, I don't know, maybe should I say empathy on, okay, what of the investments they've made that are not, okay, before the business begins to yield revenue, the investments they've made in form of maybe creation of materials, or their their nairas here and there.
Yes,
so
yes.
It's how can we bring that into paying them back? Like, do they just go?
No. They don't just go. You've raised a very valid point. So that is the beauty of having a legal professional tailor your contract to suit your needs and the realities of life, that not all co-founders will be with you for the duration of the business. But how do you make sure no one is shortchanged? So, in the co-founder agreement and even in the shareholding agreement, there's clauses that can be drafted to account for what happens if a co-founder leaves within year one. What happens? So I've talked about the vesting period, but then, these are things that co-founders primarily have to agree. So that's why you are co-founders. You sit down and hopefully you have a lawyer present, can add that professional and explain what the best practice is, and just basically say, okay, let's create several scenarios. What happens if someone leaves within year one? What are they entitled to? And everybody has to agree. What happens when somebody leaves within year 3, year 5? And I mentioned the vesting period. So there will be an agreement on the various timelines you have to cross. And at each timeline, what will you be entitled to walk away with? Some co-founders could walk away but not sell their shares. They don't want to sell their shares. They are entitled to hold on to those shares. Another thing I didn't address during the earlier part of my presentation was what happens in the event of death. we're not going to live forever. If God forbid, co-founder B dies, what happens to those shares? Typically, those shares should pass on to the estate and named beneficiaries. But another co-founder might say, no, 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 no. Why? Why? What about us? What about co-founder A and C? So that it depends on what the co-founders agree to. The co-founders might say, no, everybody came together, put hands together, joined hands together. If one co-founder dies, it is only fair that it goes to the estate. The estate should enjoy the fruits of the labor of the co-founder that died. If not, what happens to the co-founder's family? So these are discussions that must be made first and foremost. Then the legal will add their sort of professional, how would I say, will add their own professional opinion, they will find on it, and then it will be drafted into terms. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, now talking about, yes, ma, it did. But talking about the vest period, when we've not gotten to when founder leaves before before the period has been put as the vest period, does it mean maybe not in the legal document now, like just okay, maybe how do I put it now? In form of empathy. Yes. So like, okay, what can we do? Maybe it's not in the best period, but let's take for example now, in future, because of this that you have put in, we will by ourselves just give you something later. Is it like, where can we include that in the law? That's just what I'm.
Yeah, we're talking about a contract, not the law. So if founders say, you know what, we need to make sure we protect the interests of our families, not just us, let's create a fund or something, and in the event of any issues, tap into that fund. You see, the beauty of working with other people is you create your rules, as long as those rules are not, as long as those rules do not contradict the natural, not the natural, contradict written laws of the land, so the constitution and other secondary laws. So if you and your co-founders feel like life happens to us all, aside from getting life insurance for each of the co-founders. And please, I think it's a great time to mention, you know, if you're a co-founder full-time, an entrepreneur full-time, you're in a risky business. Let's be very honest, right? So I want to imagine that all of you have life insurance. So if you don't have life insurance, I'm not in the insurance industry. It's just because we're talking about mortality, and death comes to all of us. And when you're running a business, things happen. So, you know, apart from getting life insurance and co-founders saying each and every one of us must get life insurance, co-founders, if they want to, can decide to set up a fund or something, and the agreement can contain a succession plan. Like, everybody should have a succession plan for their business. I mean, it goes without saying. If you run a business without a succession plan, when you're gone, that business is gone. And I believe everybody on this call is building for the future. We're all trying to build a legacy for our children and our children's children and for the public at large. Can you imagine if any of your favorite brands or startups that have now become big suddenly disappear? Can you imagine the pain you would feel knowing that, oh, this payment platform has disappeared, or that? So startups play such a major role in our daily lives. They do so much critical work to make lives better that you must have a succession plan for your business. And on a separate note, the succession plan can be prepared internally and it can be verified or fine-tuned by a lawyer. So, Ruth, to summarize, your startup is what you make it. That's why 80% of startups die within 2 years, because a lot of people don't pay attention to all the fine details. If I die, who will take over? Nobody thinks of that. The business goes. I pick my pastor. My pastor told me to speak to that person because they go to the same church. That the basis for picking a co-founder. So sometimes we let sentiments affect the way we run our businesses. We don't approach business from a practical, long-term view. We're sentimental. Oh, it's too expensive. Oh, I can't use that co-founder. He's not from my church. He's not from my state. He's not from, he's white, he's Indian, he's this, he's that. You must have a very logical, pragmatic approach to the way you run your business. And your approaches will be validated by your legal. So when you hire the right legal team, they can now put that into processes, policies, concept notes, you name it, white papers. It can go on and on and on. So I always say, a business is what you make it. I believe if you think big enough to start a business in the first place, you need to be prepared to put in the work to make it successful and make it thrive. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Beverly. You've done, to put it how it is, you've done good justice to the topic today, and time just flew by very fast.
It did, very fast.
Thank you very much. We have a question on YouTube, but because we have to go very soon, I'll just talk about it briefly. So Ikechukwu on YouTube is saying that letting professionals do what they know how to do. For a startup, sometimes financial constraints to bring in professionals can be an issue. Please, what do you advise?
What do we advise? Financial constraints. Look, right now, the world has changed a lot. Professional, conventional sectors like the legal sector have changed a lot. Just earlier today, I was talking about alternative fee arrangements, AFAs. There's different ways to charge. We've come a long way from the very rigid approach to how lawyers charge. There's a lot more flexibility now. There's contingency fees, which is where you're working on projects. Those are expected to make a certain amount of money, and the lawyer takes a percentage as their fees, contingency fees. There's so many different ways to slice it, if you want to call it that. So I feel that where there's a real intention to work with legal, you will find what is okay for you. You just have to go out there and engage, like pick up the phone. Hey, I saw your website article. I'm very interested in working with you, but I'm not too sure about the fees. Can you talk me through? Lawyers are humans, okay? But not scary. Engagement, communication, that's all. And reaching an arrangement that is mutually beneficial. So trust me, there's a lot more flexibility with fees than you think. There's a lot of flexibility. Yeah, you're welcome, Danny. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beverly, and for a fantastic session. Yes, it's recorded too. We'll still share with people that couldn't. Yes, we shared with people that couldn't make it so that they can watch. Awesome. And we stream live on YouTube too, so people can watch on YouTube and all of that. So we really do appreciate your coming. Thank you. We can see the list of articles being dropped, and you shared some articles. With
so many.
It's so many. Yeah. So we are still going to share with members in the community and those that are registered to come. So thank you very much.
We
really do appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. And to everybody that made it to this call, thank you very much. We are cooking up something with OAL. So very soon we hope that we'll finalize that and bring that to you. So maybe we'll be able to attend to Ikechukwu's challenge. And of course, Ikechukwu is speaking for a number of startup founders. Money and all of that is always a big issue. So Beverly has dropped on Twitter. So
Twitter handles.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
So see you. Bye. See you at the next edition.
See you soon.
See you.
Bye-bye.
See you at the next edition. Take care.
Yeah,
Bye.
see you. Bye.